Welcome to my channel, States of Heart, and today's story isn't one you'll soon forget. It begins on a quiet suburban street, where everything looked perfect from the outside. Trimmed lawns, pastel-colored houses, and the ever-watchful eyes of an HOA president who thought she ran the world. But perfection can be a disguise. Behind one of those garage doors lay a secret that could tear everything apart. The morning began with the usual sound of sprinklers, ticking across manicured lawns. I had just come home from a long trip, my duffel bag still in the back seat of my truck. The sun cast long shadows across the cul-de-sac, and for a brief moment it felt peaceful. Then she appeared, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting everything but her own guilt. She walked straight toward me, her heels clacking against the driveway like a judge's gavel. Her lips curled into that familiar, disapproving smirk as she spoke about HOA violations, grass length, and unauthorized parking. But behind her words there was something else, a twitch, a nervous energy she couldn't hide. I could tell she was scared of something, but she didn't want anyone to know. When I tried to open my garage, her tone sharpened. She asked what was inside. I told her to mind her business. That's when she made the call. I watched her step back, clutching her phone, whispering something urgent into it. Within minutes, I heard sirens. The sound grew louder, closer, until the air itself seemed to tighten. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Doors cracked open. The peace of the street shattered into 100 fragments of panic. I raised my hands, trying to calm the situation, but it was too late. The police cars screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn. They shouted commands I couldn't even process. And then, without warning, the world exploded in sound. They fired. The deafening crack of gunfire echoed off the houses, scattering birds into the sky. I fell backward, the shock wave slamming through my chest. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of oil from the driveway. My ears rang as I stared at the garage door, still closed, still silent. But then came the sound that froze everyone. A groan, deep and human, from behind the steel panels. One of the officers shouted that someone was inside. Another yelled to breach it. Karen screamed that I was hiding something dangerous, that she'd warned them. I wanted to speak, to explain, but my words drowned beneath the chaos. When they pulled the garage door lever, the metal creaked, rising inch by inch, and what lay behind it made every weapon drop and every breath catch. There, slumped against the wall, was a man. His suit was torn, his shirt soaked in blood. The moment light touched his face, one of the officers stepped back in disbelief. It was the governor, the actual sitting governor of the state, and he was barely alive. For a second, time stopped. No one moved. The entire scene froze like a photograph taken in the middle of a nightmare. Then, chaos again. Officers shouted into radios, calling for medics. Karen stumbled backward, stammering about how she didn't know, how she thought I was some kind of threat. I could see it now, the fear behind her control, the panic in her eyes. She hadn't expected this. None of us had. As the paramedics arrived, the governor tried to speak. His voice was weak, barely a whisper, but I leaned close enough to hear. He said my name. Not sir, not you there, my name. And then, he said, they found me. His hand gripped my wrist with the strength of a drowning man. And just before they lifted him onto the stretcher, he added, don't let them open the folder. The folder. My mind flashed back to 2 nights before, a rest stop off Highway 60. Rain hammering the roof of my truck, headlights flashing behind me. A man in a suit had handed me a small brown envelope, sealed and marked only with the governor's insignia. He told me to keep it safe, said it was evidence that could bring down powerful people. He never said who. He never said why. Just that if something happened to him, I'd know what to do. I had locked that folder inside a hidden compartment in my garage wall, behind a false panel. And now, as the police swarmed the scene, I realized that secret wasn't mine anymore. Hours passed. They taped off my driveway, questioned every word I said, and tried to piece together how the governor ended up bleeding in my garage. Karen kept pacing, her voice trembling as she told anyone who'd listened that she thought I was a criminal. that she'd only called because I looked suspicious. The officers didn't listen. The FBI arrived soon after. Black SUVs, dark suits, emotionless faces. They asked me the same questions again and again. I told them the truth, every detail, every moment. But the more I spoke, the more I saw it in their eyes. Disbelief mixed with fear. They weren't trying to solve anything. They were trying to contain it. That night, when the last of the reporters left and the street finally fell silent, I sat on my porch and stared at the yellow tape fluttering in the wind. My garage door was still half open, the light above it flickering like a dying pulse. Inside, I could see the smear of blood where the governor had fallen. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing too much. Because I had seen what was inside that folder before. I hid it. Photos, names, transfers, proof of something that could destroy lives. And now, those people knew I existed. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. No number, just a message. You shouldn't have opened it. I stood up, heart pounding, scanning the dark street. Every house looked asleep, but I knew eyes were watching. Karen's curtains were drawn, but the faint glow of her phone lit her face inside. She was texting someone. I couldn't see who. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She wasn't just nosy. She was part of it. I went into the garage, the air still thick with the metallic scent of blood. I pulled down the hidden panel and grabbed the folder. The edges were still damp where rain had seeped in that night on the highway. I tucked it into my jacket and closed the panel. As I turned to leave, headlights swept across the driveway. Another SUV? Not police this time. The doors opened slowly, and two men stepped out, not in uniform, dressed like they belonged in Washington, not a cul-de-sac. They said they were here to collect the evidence for national security reasons. I told them I'd already handed everything to the police. They didn't believe me. When they stepped closer, I saw one of their hands move toward his jacket. My instincts took over. I hit the switch that dropped the garage door. The metal slammed down between us as bullets shattered the windows. I dove behind the tool bench, heart racing. Splinters rained down. I could hear them circling, trying to break in through the side door. Then, out of nowhere, Karen's voice cut through the night, screaming at them to stop. The gunfire ceased. Tires screeched. Silence returned. When I opened the door again, they were gone. Karen was standing there, shaking, her phone still in her hand. She told me she didn't know they'd go that far, that she thought it was just an investigation. Her words tumbled out like broken glass. She had been paid to watch me, to report what I did, to call when I opened the garage. She thought she was helping someone important. But now she realized what that someone really wanted: to erase anyone who knew about the folder. By morning, the news had already broken. The governor had died in the hospital. Official reports claimed it was a failed assassination attempt during an undisclosed visit. They didn't mention me. They didn't mention Karen. They didn't mention the shots. Fired in a quiet suburban neighborhood, or the men who came after midnight. Everything was neatly buried beneath headlines that said tragedy, security breach, investigation ongoing. But I knew better. They weren't investigating anything. They were cleaning up. I left that day with only what I could carry. The folder stayed with me. Karen disappeared 2 days later. Some say she moved out of state. Some say she never made it that far. All I know is that the HOA meetings stopped. The houses grew quiet again, and the street went back to pretending everything was normal. Months later, I sat in a small motel room off the interstate, the folder spread open across the table. The names inside were powerful senators, corporate heads, even military officials. Every line pointed to a conspiracy that reached higher than I ever imagined. I recorded everything, every page, every detail, and sent copies to people who could make a difference. Or at least, people who weren't afraid to try. Sometimes, when I drive past another perfect neighborhood, with its trimmed hedges and smiling faces, I think about that night, about the sirens, the gunfire, the garage door slowly rising to reveal a truth that was never supposed to see daylight. And I realized something. It wasn't Karen's call that started it. It was the system she believed in, the illusion of control, the obedience to rules without question, the blindness that lets evil hide in plain sight. This isn't a story about a nosy neighbor or a wrong address. It's about what happens when the truth gets locked behind a door, and those who protect lies will do anything to make sure it never opens again. Welcome back to States of Heart, where every story reminds us that sometimes the quietest streets hide the loudest secrets,